We have begun learning the first of the approaches to tefillah, known as Bitzur. Bitzur comes from the pasuk Batzar li ekra Hashem. When I am in pain or suffering, I cry out to Hashem. So this is the most basic form of tefillah, when we cry out in need, the Eis Tzara, when it's a time of great need. This frames how tefillah needs to be davened where we have the most extreme need and are calling out for help. As we explained previously, this is what sets a human apart from an animal. Once an animal's needs have been filled, when a cow has eaten its fill, it's content. It has no worries. But a human always worries about the future. He can never be satisfied because he understands he still needs and will always need. He feels what he's lacking, and the greater his understanding is, the greater he feels that he's lacking. Every human being on this world is by definition in a position of tzara, of extreme need, and Hashem engineered it that way so that we should daven. Essentially, it would be ideal if we could connect to Hashem through tefillah without tzara, without great need. We should connect to Hashem simply because of all the tremendous chasadim He does for us, all the goodness He showers upon us. Our tefillah should pour out of our hearts from extreme hakaras hatayv. However, it's not easy to daven authentically from hakaras hatayv. It's the domain of great people. And why is that? Because the nature of chasadim that Hashem pours upon us is that they cause us to forget Hashem and not take notice of where they're coming from. As the pasuk says, "Pen ezba vekichashti ve'amarti mi Hashem." I might become satiated and I will deny and say, "Who is Hashem?" While tsaris have the opposite effect. They have the powerful ability to bring a person's heart close to Hashem. There's a famous mashal given where someone started throwing $100 bills from his balcony to the street below. As soon as they started falling, everybody below started scrabbling to pick them up and find where they fell, and never once looked up to acknowledge where the bounty was coming from. The person got annoyed that he wasn't being acknowledged, so he changed his tactic. He started to throw rocks. Now, once the first rock hit, immediately everybody turned up and tried to find the perpetrator of the crime. That's the difference between when we're showered with goodness and when we're showered and when we suffer. When we're showered with goodness, we just look at the goodness and we just take it. And when we suffer, we look up and we want to know where it's coming from. Tzaras have the ability to give us a hislahavus and hislahatus in tefillah, fire, a bren, that can't be achieved otherwise. The person most bored during davening, who can daven a 3-second Shemona Esrei, when someone near and dear to him gets sick, chas v'shalom, he finds the inspiration to daven for real, and perhaps shed some tears during davening. His heart will open up. He can reach levels in tefillah that great tzaddikim strive for. Chazal say, why were the imahos stricken with being barren? Why did they have to suffer being childless for so long? So Chazal say, because Hashem desires tefillahs of tzaddikim. Now, we know, were Avram to have had Yitzchak immediately, we cannot begin to imagine a drop of the ocean of the hakaras hatayv Avram would have expressed in tefillah. The depth of emotion, the feeling and heart that Avram would have invested in communicating with Hashem. Yet nevertheless, the level he was able to reach because he had a tzara, a difficulty, he was childless, was much greater. We see that large parts of Tehillim are dedicated to tefillah of this sort. Afafuni chavle maves umitzare sha'el mitzauni. I've been surrounded by ropes of death. Tzara v'yagan emtza uv'shem Hashem ekra. When I have pain and difficulty, I call out in Hashem's name. Ana Hashem alta nafshi, Hashem, please save my soul, and so on. David HaMelech always perceived himself in great difficulty, and that is what his tefillahs revolved around. Even a person who will do anything not to receive help from someone else, he'll live in squalor just not to have to come on to other people. But when a person's child gets sick, chas v'shalom, they have no choice. And likewise in tefillah, even the person who can be the most lazy in davening, but once he's in a situation where he's desperate, his tefillos will be amazing. And this is the way we need to start approaching davening, by realizing how great our needs are. One of the rules of how Hashem runs this world is, though He knows everything and sees everything, He treats it as if He doesn't see or hear until it's presented before Him. This is how Hashem created us and this world, and it's the importance of our Tselem Elokim, that even though we might be suffering through a very difficult time, and Hashem knows it and sees it, but will treat it as if He doesn't, until we spread out the situation in front of Him, when we daven to Him and tell Him of our pain and our difficulty. Before we daven, it's as if Hashem isn't aware. Once we daven, then Hashem is our Av HaRachamim, a loving Father, who does what any father would do when he hears of his child's difficulty and pain. He drops everything he's doing and rushes to his aid. Nothing can prevent these tefillos from reaching Hashem's ear, so to speak. As it says, all the doors to Shemayim can be closed except for the doors of tears and the doors of inflicted pain, Sharei Dima and Sharei Aina'ah. Imagining a father who puts his son outside to punish him, he'll ignore perhaps his entreaties to let him back in because he's trying to punish him. But if his son starts screaming in fear because something is scaring him, that door will fly open and the father will bring his son in immediately. Truthfully, a better mashal would be the son of a world-renowned heart specialist starts to suffer from heart problems. He's visited in the hospital by a friend who asks him, how is it possible that you're suffering from a heart ailment and your father, the world expert on this, isn't here by your side treating you? And the friend answers, it's very simple. My father doesn't have Ruach HaKodesh. He doesn't know I'm sick because I haven't told him yet. So likewise, Hashem doesn't use His Ruach HaKodesh, so to speak, to determine what's wrong with us. He waits to hear it from us. As David HaMelech said, Hashem Shema B'Koili Tiyena Oznecha Kashuvois L'Kol Tachanuna. Hashem, listen to my voice, and may your ears listen closely to my entreaties. And this is a Gzeres HaKosav, a decree of heaven, that Hashem only replies when He's spoken to. He only reacts to what He hears. And this is it's frightening in a way, but that's the way Hashem works with this world, and it's very straightforward. When we suffer, a baskel comes from Shemayim saying, why don't you just tell me what your problem is? There's a machlekes between the Ramban and the Rambam as to the status of tefillah. The Rambam maintains it is one of the 613 mitzvahs to daven each day. The Ramban disagrees, and he believes that it is not counted as one of the 613 mitzvahs to daven each day. That obligation is rabbinic in origin. However, the Ramban concedes to the Rambam that there is one form of tefillah which is minat Torah. The Torah does require. He writes that when we are in a tzara, we're in a situation of extreme or dire need, then the Torah obligates us to turn to Hashem, just as a servant would turn to his master. The Chinuch quotes this as well, and he adds that someone who is in a tzara and doesn't call out to Hashem has been mevatel this mitzvah. He's not fulfilled it, and not only that, but he is actively ignoring Hashem's hashgacha and making as if Hashem doesn't care and doesn't control everything. And this is a very important point to remember. Say we've davened Shachris and we fulfilled our obligation to daven, both rabbinic and the Torah obligation according to the Rambam, who says you have to daven every day. But then, on our way to work or whatever we're doing, suddenly we experience great pain, or something is stopping us from doing something very important, and we get stuck in this difficult situation. At that point, we're now in an Eis Tzara, and we become obligated to daven again. And according to the Ramban, this is a Torah obligation to daven to Hashem, to say some words of tefillah expressing our need to Hashem. This is serious mitzvah. It's an obligation, a Torah obligation, and isn't absolved by the fact that we've already davened previously that day. Great tzaddikim like the Rav of Brisk would always have words of tefillah slipping from their lips. Even while speaking to people, he would pause for a moment and say, L'shuascha kvisi Hashem. He was always connected to Hashem through tefillah and perceived every situation as extremely important, and then did what Hashem wanted from it. He davened. The concept of Bitzur, of davening as a person who's in great need and a tzara, is a very important way to begin approaching tefillah. When in need, call out to the nearest person, so to speak, for help. And that's Hashem, of course. Imagine you're on a ladder, and the ladder starts to shake as if it will topple over. What would you do? So you'd scream out to someone standing there and yell that he should grab the ladder. With the knowledge that Hashem is right here, when our ladder is shaking, just call out to Hashem, L'shi'ascha kvisi Hashem, please grab the ladder for me. If we examine ourselves, we'll see that this is really a natural reaction that Hashem has embedded within us. It's natural to call out for help. And even if no one is there, we'll still mouth the words, usually out loud. Like if we're very hungry, we'll say, I wish I had something to eat. Or if we need a hand, we'll say, I wish someone could grab that or hold that for me. It's a natural reaction. It's no different than the instinctive defense mechanisms we have built into ourselves. On a deeper level, it has a spiritual nature. Hashem built us in a way to call out to Him. But we have to work on that. We have to train ourselves to utilize this natural reaction and direct it properly to call out to Hashem and to recognize that He's there to help us. To look at the concept of tefillah be'ez tzara properly, you have to think of a mashal this way. When we're driving in a car and we look at the trees on the side of the road, it appears to us as if the trees are rushing towards us. In reality, it's the opposite. We are rushing toward the trees. So when we are in a tzara, when we're faced with great difficulty, so we think we need to move towards Hashem and we need to come close to Him, but what actually is happening is the opposite. Hashem is rushing towards us. That is ima yanechi b'tzara. That's what's actually going on when we're in a situation of tzara, of difficulty. To get an idea of the power of tefillah in the time of tzara, let's consider what the Medrash says about the tefillahs of Moshe, who davened to Hashem to allow him to enter Eretz Yisrael, the beginning of Parshas Va'eschanan. The Medrash says that Moshe clothed himself in black sackcloth and he davened, and Hashem called out to the whole heavenly host, all the malachim, and told them to lock down every single gate that there was in heaven, because the decree had already been sealed. Moshe was not allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael. And the lashon of the Medrash is that at that point Hashem called out to the malacha in a behala, in a panic, to quickly lock the gates, because Moshe's tefillah was so powerful, it was cutting through all the mechitzas, anything blocking it between it and Hashem, like a sword. His tefillahs shook up the whole heavens, the whole Shemayim, and it's what's referred to when we say Az b'koil ra'ash gadol. It was like an earthquake in Shemayim. Now that was Moshe's tefillahs. It's something we can't fathom. But the Zohar discusses three types of tefillahs. It says there are three places where we find the word tefillah associated with someone. One is tefillah l'Moshe, Isha Elokim, which we say every Shabbos in davening. The other is tefillah l'David, we find in Tehillim. And the third is tefillah l'ani ki yatef, tefillah to a poor person. So Azariah says that tefillah of Moshe can't be duplicated by any other person. The tefillah of David can't be duplicated by any other king. But which tefillah is the greatest? The Zohar says tefillah la'ani is the greatest. The tefillah of a poor person. Why? Because the tefillah of a poor person comes from a broken heart. And it says, Karev Hashem lenishbur lev. Hashem is close to those whose hearts are broken. When a poor person davens, all the doors of heaven are opened. That's what the Zohar says. Think of how amazing this is. Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillas were so powerful, they were cutting through the heavens. And Hashem sent the malachim in a panic to close the doors. But a poor person who is davening with a broken heart has a greater power of tefillah, and all doors are opened. That's the power of tefillah mitaych tsar, tefillah that's davened in a situation of dire need. There's a sefer called Marganisa Tova, which the Chavetz Chaim printed a part of it in the back of Sefer Ahavas Chesed. In there, he writes that a person has to be careful, yizoher, that the humility and fear he feels while in a tzara, to use his language, he writes, hapachad v'hatzar v'hakniya, that a person feels and humbles himself when he's in a difficult situation, when he's in a tzara. He should attempt to recreate while in good times as well, b'shas shalva, times of peace, to conduct himself with that level of humility and fear of Hashem. This is really a pasuk which the Gemara darshans. It says, pasuk in Iyuv, ha'ya'aruch Shiv'acha loy b'tzar. Will you prepare your cries of tefillah without the tzara, without the difficulty? The Gemara says that if not that Avram had davened between Beis Kel and Ai while traveling through Eretz Yisrael, nothing would have been left of Klal Yisrael. That place between Beis Kel and Ai was a place where Achan stole from the booty of Yerichai and caused Klal Yisrael to suffer their only loss in their war of conquest of Eretz Yisrael, the singular loss that they suffered. And there's a difference in opinion on the Midrashim how many people died, 36,000, but they suffered a loss. And if not that Avram had preempted the davening, by davening in that place, their loss would have been so devastating, it would have destroyed their army. And this, the Gemara says, demonstrates the power and importance of davening as if there's a tzara, but before it actually happens. The truth is that this is in itself a segula to protect us from tzaras. Often, we don't understand exactly how Hashem works the world, but we see from Gemaras and Midrashim that a tzara only happens in order to encourage us to daven. Perhaps Hashem wants to bring a good thing upon us, but we don't have the schus. Perhaps we need something, but we don't have the schus. And we can only attain that by davening. So the tzara comes to make a situation where we'll daven. And as we've quoted earlier, the only reason why the Avos suffered from childlessness was so that they would daven. So that's why this sefer uses the language li zoher, to be careful, because davening properly simply saves us from dangerous situations. They become unnecessary. The Ravid, in his sefer of Shalos and Shuvas, which is known as Tmim Deim, writes a fascinating point in halacha. He's going according to those Rishonim who hold that if we don't daven in Lashon Kodesh, the Malachim don't understand us, and they won't bring those tefillas up to Shemayim. So therefore he writes that women who don't understand Lashon Kodesh, which was common in those days because the girls didn't receive an education, and they prefer to daven in the language they understand, Yiddish or whatever language they spoke. He said they shouldn't do that because they run the risk of their tefillas not being heard, unless, he says, they're davening together with the tzibur. When davening with the tzibur, Hashem is simply there, no need for malachim, because the Shekhinah rests on a tzibur. As an aside, this should reflect on the importance of making tefillah b'tzibur. It's a big deal. You have a direct connection. But then he adds that if a person is davening with tears and from being mistreated, it doesn't make a difference what language they daven in, because Sharei Dema'os and Eina'ah Le'ninalu, the gates of tears and inflicted pain, never close. Hashem waits for those tefillahs personally. But then he writes another thing. He writes that if a person davens with great kavanah from a tzara, in a dar situation, they'll be heard even though the malachim don't understand you and aren't able to bring those tefillas. And he says, we see this from Menashe, the king of Yehuda. The story of Menashe was that he had done tremendous averos and caused many of Klal Yisrael to sin with him. He was a chaytei u'machtei. He brought Avodah Zarah into Klal Yisrael and into the Beis HaMikdash. He served Avodah Zarah publicly and encouraged people to serve it with him. He murdered many people for political gains. The pasuk says that the streets of Yerushalayim were running with blood. He was captured after many decades of this behavior, and his captors placed him in a pot and began to cook him alive. Not clear if they just were trying to kill him in a torturous fashion or they were going to eat him. It sounds like they were going to eat him. He davened to Hashem, and that's a whole story in itself, how he davened to Hashem. But finally he turned to Hashem. And the Malachim, according to the Gemara, were trying to slam the doors of heaven shut and deny entrance for his tefillas to Shemayim. And Hashem, so to speak, dug a passageway in the heavens to allow Menashe's tefillos through. To use the language of the Gemara, it says, it's actually a medrash, Vayispal el Hashem vayet Allah. He davened to Hashem and Hashem listened to him. Melamed she'amalachim hayu misatmin achalonis b'rakia. They were closing the windows of Shemayim. Shloi tikanes tefillah, so that his tefillah doesn't enter. V'chater lo hakadosh baruch hu harakia, and Hashem dug through the heavens. V'kibel tefillah, and he accepted his tefillah. So we see from here, says the Ravid, that earnest tefillahs in times of great need are heard directly by Hashem, without any need of malachim to intervene. And that's the power of davening with great kavanah, as if a person's in a tzara, or when a person, la ilaha, is in a tzara.